Hello, and welcome to Sci-fi Stories. We sincerely appreciate your time with us today. But we must share that YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without an operating budget. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated staff to sustain their livelihoods and continue crafting these narratives for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or comments. Do not provoke Earth. The voice did not echo through the Grand Hall. It materialized directly within the Supreme Council, carrying the absolute weight of the deepest cosmic void. It was a dire warning from a primordial entity foretelling the collapse of their perfect empire. Yet, the luminous rulers of the galaxy only radiated amusement, preparing to unleash an invisible wave of radiation that would plunge billions into a waking nightmare. High above the swirling dust of 1,000 conquered star systems, the Supreme Council of the Galactic Alliance convened in a realm devoid of physical matter. They were beings of pure, incandescent energy, their forms shifting like auroras in a cathedral of crystallized light. For eons, they had reigned unchallenged, viewing the physical universe merely as a garden to be harvested. Today, the agenda was routine, yet monumental: the selection of the next planetary target for the Subconscious Assimilation Project. Subconscious assimilation was not an act of war in the traditional sense. To the Council, war was a crude and primitive concept. Instead, it was an elegant, devastating process of total mental subjugation. By projecting a hyper-frequency resonance across an entire world, they could force a planetary population into a state of artificial, inescapable hibernation. While the physical bodies lay dormant, their minds would be trapped in an engineered dreamscape, meticulously designed to extract the raw, boundless creative energy of the host species. This stolen mental ambrosia was the fuel that sustained the Council's luminous immortality, powering their civilization while the victims slowly withered away in their euphoric cages. Representative Xylos, a towering construct of searing blue plasma, stepped forward to project his findings into the shared consciousness of the Assembly. The image of a vibrant, blue and green sphere materialized before them. "I present the third planet of the Sol system," Xylos announced, his mental projection resonating with absolute certainty. "They call it Earth. We have observed this nascent species for mere millennia, and their psychological profile is uniquely suited for our harvest. The human mind possesses an extraordinary, almost wasteful capacity for imagination and abstract creation. They dream of impossibilities, weave intricate fictions, and generate emotional energy at a staggering rate. Yet, their planetary defense technology is laughable. They barely understand the rudimentary concepts of interstellar travel, let alone psychic shielding. They are a profound source of fuel, sitting utterly defenseless in the dark." A murmur of harmonic agreement rippled through the Council. The logic was flawless. The harvest would yield enough energy to power their grandest citadels for another 10,000 years. Xylos moved to initiate the sequence, his tendrils of light reaching toward the activation matrix. Suddenly, the ambient light of the chamber flickered and dimmed. A suffocating pressure descended upon the gathering, crushing the previously harmonious atmosphere. From the darkest, unmapped corners of the cosmic void, a nameless, ancient entity manifested. It possessed no form, no glowing aura, only an overwhelming presence of ancient gravity and sorrow. The energy beings recoiled, their light sputtering in the face of something infinitely older and profoundly darker. "Cease this action," the ancient entity commanded, its voice a grinding tectonic force within their minds. "Do not provoke Earth. You look upon them and see an easy harvest, a fragile species ripe for the taking. You are entirely blind to the truth." Xylos, recovering his composure, flared brightly. "Speak, remnant of the past. Why should the Supreme Council halt the assimilation of such primitive beings? Because, the entity replied, the weight of its words tearing at the fabric of the Council's reality. The human mind is not the peaceful wellspring of energy you presume it to be. Beneath their fragile flesh lies a boundless ocean of chaos. They are a species forged in adversity, born from violence, and driven by an infinite, terrifying will to survive. Their subconscious is a labyrinth of nightmares, a crucible of contradictions. If you tether your network to their collective minds, you will not extract their energy. You will invite their chaos into your sanctuary. They will adapt to your dreamscape. They will infect your perfect order with their unyielding defiance, and they will tear your energy network apart from the inside out. The silence that followed was heavy, not with fear, but with the suffocating arrogance of the undefeated. For millions of years, the Supreme Council had never known failure. They had assimilated countless worlds, subjugated minds far older and wiser than humanity. To be warned of danger from a species that had barely conquered its own moon was not just absurd. It was insulting. Your warnings are the paranoid whispers of a forgotten era, Xylos stated, dismissing the entity with a wave of blinding white energy. We are the apex of existence. No primitive mind can resist the perfection of our design. Without further hesitation, Xylos plunged his consciousness into the activation matrix. The ancient entity vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill of impending doom. Deep within the core of the Council's massive orbital structure, the assimilation engine roared to life. A devastating command was executed, generating a colossal, invisible beam of pure psychological radiation. The silent strike tore through the fabric of space, traveling at impossible speeds, cutting through the void on a direct, unavoidable trajectory toward Earth, ready to lock billions of unaware humans into an eternal, waking sleep. The strike was completely silent. There were no warning sirens, no shattered skies, and no fire raining from the heavens. One moment, the world was a cacophony of nearly 8 billion souls rushing through the chaotic rhythm of their daily routines. The next, a bizarre, iridescent light washed over the entire globe. It moved faster than a human heartbeat. In major metropolitan centers, vehicles drifted to gentle halts as their drivers slumped over the steering wheels. In crowded transit terminals, thousands collapsed in perfect unison, their bodies hitting the floor like discarded marionettes. The global hum of civilization was extinguished in a fraction of a second. Humanity had been forcibly pushed into the abyss of the Council's engineered dreamscape. To the victims, there was no sensation of falling, no terror of dying. They simply transitioned seamlessly into a flawless mental prison. This constructed reality was terrifyingly beautiful. It was an endless, sun-drenched afternoon where every individual found themselves trapped within a bespoke loop of their deepest, most desperate desires. A grieving mother held her lost child once again. A failing artist stood before a cheering crowd of tens of thousands. A lonely old man sat surrounded by a bustling, loving family. It was an agonizingly perfect illusion, meticulously designed to be so comforting, so overwhelmingly happy, that the human mind would willingly surrender its evolutionary will to resist. In this ocean of artificial euphoria, the instinct to fight was completely drowned by the sheer weight of absolute contentment. But the Supreme Council made a miscalculation, a microscopic anomaly they could never have anticipated in their millions of years of unchallenged dominance. Deep underground in a cluttered, windowless basement laboratory, neuroengineer Beck Barrett was in the middle of a high-risk experiment. For the past 72 hours, Beck had been awake, surviving on bitter coffee and sheer obsessive drive. He was testing a heavily modified, homemade electroencephalogram helmet, a device rigged with over 200 individual neurosensors, His ultimate goal was to map the deepest, most inaccessible frequencies of the human subconscious, bypassing the brain's natural defense mechanisms. At the precise millisecond, the alien radiation beam saturated the planet. Beck threw the main power switch on his diagnostic console. A massive surge of electricity coursed through his makeshift helmet just as the Council's subjugation wave violently collided with his mind. The intersection of these two forces was catastrophic. The raw, unfiltered output of Beck's neural scanner acted as an impromptu magnetic deflector. It did not possess the power to stop the assimilation wave, but it fractured the incoming signal just enough to create a localized, microscopic blind spot. As his physical body collapsed onto the cold concrete floor of his basement, his consciousness was violently ripped from his physical form and thrown into the digital ether. But unlike the rest of the 8 billion souls on Earth, Beck's mind was not wiped clean by the euphoric filter. His awareness remained piercingly, agonizingly intact. Beck opened his eyes to a world that was both intimately familiar and fundamentally wrong. He was standing on the street, right outside his house, but the sky above him was a bruised, shifting canvas of metallic purple and sickly green. The air tasted bitterly of static electricity. As he took his first hesitant step, he noticed the horrific distortions of reality. A skyscraper in the distance was slowly twisting upon itself like a ribbon caught in a non-existent wind. Vehicles floated several inches above the pavement, suspended in a silent, frozen tableau. The fundamental laws of physics had been violently rewritten. He was standing within the architecture of a hallucination. "This is a construct," Beck whispered to himself, his voice sounding entirely hollow, completely lacking any natural echo. A shared neural environment, an invasion. He began to walk, moving like a solitary ghost through the silent, warped reflection of his city. He pressed his hand against the solid brick wall of his neighbor's house and found no resistance, stepping effortlessly through the barrier and directly into their living room. What he saw made the blood run cold in his digital veins. His neighbors were there, frozen in a gentle embrace, their faces locked in expressions of absolute, synthetic ecstasy. But, protruding from the base of their skulls, were colossal, pulsating tethers of ethereal blue light. Beck followed the glowing cables with his eyes, watching them phase right through the ceiling. He rushed back out to the desolate street and looked up. The sight was utterly apocalyptic. Millions of these glowing threads were rising from every house, every office building, and every street corner, converging into a massive, blinding vortex high above the artificial atmosphere. The tethers were rhythmically pulsing, visibly draining the raw, vibrant life force of his species and channeling it out into the cold void of space. Humanity was not merely asleep. They were being systematically harvested. A primal surge of panic threatened to consume his rationality, but Beck ruthlessly clamped down on his fear. He was a scientist, a man who had spent his entire adult life dissecting the labyrinth of the brain. He realized with chilling clarity that if this world was built on neural pathways and projected frequencies, then it was essentially a highly advanced piece of software. And any software, no matter how alien or godlike its creators might be, relied on a foundational code to maintain its structural integrity. Beck closed his eyes and forced himself to stop looking at the illusion of the quiet suburban street. Instead, he commanded his mind to perceive the underlying architecture of the environment: the fake asphalt, the unnatural sky, the frozen people. They all began to dissolve into a torrential matrix of flashing neuro-linguistic geometry. He could see the structural integrity of the dreamscape, the massive load-bearing pillars of the alien illusion, and more importantly, he saw the microscopic vulnerabilities in their rigid programming. He reached out with his mind, bypassing his phantom hands, and touched a thick strand of the illusionary code. It vibrated with a foreign, profoundly arrogant frequency. Beck tightened his mental grip and violently twisted the data stream. A street lamp next to him suddenly shattered its own programming, its color violently shifting from a sterile white to a harsh, aggressive crimson. A cold, predatory smile crept across Beck's face. The beings in the cosmos had trapped humanity in a cage of the mind, but they had accidentally locked a master lockpicker inside with them. He did not need to run, and he certainly did not need to hide. He needed an army. Beck turned his absolute focus toward the glowing tethers pulsing in the sky, mentally tracing the thickest, most resilient strands of consciousness in the immediate vicinity. He began manipulating the code, rewriting the rules of the alien physics around him. It was time to start waking the others. It was time to shatter the illusion from the inside out. Light years away, within the sterile, luminous halls of the Supreme Council, a single microscopic node on the grand assimilation matrix flickered from a harmonic blue to a dissonant, aggressive red. The automated sentry systems of the orbital structure flagged the anomaly as a minor code degradation, a statistical inevitably when processing a planetary population of nearly 8 billion minds. Representative Xylos barely glanced at the alert drifting across his peripheral consciousness. "A localized bioelectric fluctuation," he proclaimed to the empty, echoing halls of his citadel. "Recalibrate the harmonic filters and ignore it. Do not interrupt the energy flow for a trivial glitch." It was the most catastrophic misjudgment in the history of the universe. They were beings of pure logic and sterile perfection. They had no concept of a spark starting a forest fire. Down in the digital trenches of the conquered Earth, Beck Barrett was moving with the speed and precision of a phantom. He bypassed the thickest clusters of docile, sedated minds, ignoring the billions trapped in their blissful illusions. Instead, he traced the glowing tethers to find individuals whose neural signatures fiercely fought against the euphoric sedative. He was looking for mental scars, for trauma, for the unbreakable will to survive. He found a seasoned military tactician drowning in a fake memory of a peaceful retirement, her subconscious thrashing violently against the unnatural calm of the simulation. He found a brilliant astrophysicist trapped in an endless loop of receiving a prestigious award, his mind subconsciously recognizing the fundamental mathematical errors in the architectural geometry of the auditorium. He found hardened wilderness survivors, trauma surgeons, firefighters, and combat veterans. Beck shattered their fabricated realities one by one. He plunged his digital consciousness directly into theirs, tearing away the heavy veil of the alien hallucination. "Wake up," he ordered, his voice echoing like a thunderclap in the depths of their minds. "You are being fed a paralyzing lie. Open your eyes to the cage." Disorientation was quickly and violently replaced by righteous fury. Beck stood before an assembly of hundreds, then thousands, and soon tens of thousands of awakened minds, gathered in a warped, gray void between the simulated cities. "This entire world is built on thought and manipulated frequencies," Beck explained, his voice projecting clearly across the silent, angry army. "The entities draining our life force rely on absolute compliance and rigid geometric logic. They do not understand chaos. They do not understand human imagination." He raised his hand, and the digital matter around him aggressively warped. A heavy, jagged broadsword materialized in his grasp, forged entirely from the sheer force of his concentrated will. Whatever you can visualize, whatever you can conceptualize with enough violence and clarity, becomes physical reality here. Arm yourselves. The response was instantaneous and breathtaking. The simulated air crackled with raw, kinetic potential as the best and most resilient minds of humanity began to forcefully bend the alien architecture. Rifles that defied the fundamental laws of physics, blades composed of concentrated thermal energy, and gravity-crushing kinetic hammers materialized seamlessly in their hands. But physical weapons, even conceptual ones, were not enough to completely break the assimilation matrix. Beck realized they needed to strike directly at the psychological vulnerability of their arrogant captors. The Supreme Council had lived in utter, unassailable safety for millions of years. They had eradicated fear, pain, and horror from their entire existence. Humanity, however, bathed in those exact elements daily. "Do not just fight them," Beck commanded, his eyes burning with a dangerous, calculating light. "Terrify them. Pull from the darkest, most twisted corners of your minds. Unleash your nightmares." The collective human consciousness responded with devastating, grotesque creativity. They synchronized their deepest traumas, their primal fears of the dark, of apex predators, of the horrific unknown, and projected them violently outward. The serene, pastel skies of the dreamscape began to boil, turning a sickening shade of bruised purple and pitch black, colossal. Shifting entities of shadow and jagged teeth tore themselves right out of the digital ground. These were not mere programs. They were living, breathing manifestations of human terror. These nightmare monoliths let out deafening, distorted shrieks and hurled themselves toward the massive energy gates in the sky, their shadowy claws ripping massive chunks out of the Council's delicate code. High above in the cosmic void, sheer panic finally pierced the sterile, glowing calm of the Supreme Council. The assimilation matrix was actively bleeding. Xylos, his massive plasma form flickering with unprecedented, erratic agitation, authorized the immediate deployment of the mental armored units. Tens of thousands of crystalline, geometrically perfect enforcers descended rapidly into the dreamscape. They were heavy suppression programs designed to seamlessly eradicate logic errors, moving in perfectly synchronized, highly predictable formations, ready to fire beams of absolute order to permanently pacify the human anomaly. They descended directly into a slaughterhouse. The alien enforcers expected a logical, mathematically sound countermeasure. Instead, they were met with the absolute, unpredictable savagery of human tactical chaos. The awakened humans did not fight in structured formations. A specialized squad of combat veterans rapidly flanked the crystalline units, using hyperkinetic grappling hooks to forcefully pull the pristine enforcers into chaotic, brutal melee brawls, shattering their perfect glass-like bodies with heavy gravity hammers. Brilliant scientists rapidly rewrote the localized gravity fields on the fly, sending entire platoons of alien troops crashing violently into their own energy tethers. The nightmare entities fed voraciously on the sudden influx of alien panic, growing larger and significantly more vicious, aggressively tearing the armored units apart limb from crystalline limb. The humans fought with a reckless, almost suicidal intensity that the rigid alien algorithms simply could not comprehend or process. If a human avatar was destroyed in the clash, they simply rebooted their consciousness through Beck's proxy servers and threw themselves right back into the bloody fray with even greater, more terrifying ferocity. The flawless, euphoric mental prison had been utterly and irreversibly desecrated. It was no longer a silent harvesting farm. It was a scorched, blood-soaked psychological war zone. The artificial sky was burning brightly, with a volatile mixture of digital fire and suffocating shadow. The agonizing screams of the shattered alien enforcers echoed continuously through the collapsing geometry of the ruined city. At the very center of the raging storm stood Beck Barrett, calmly directing the chaotic, beautiful symphony of destruction. He watched with grim satisfaction as the largest nightmare entities finally breached the primary energy gate, the colossal structure shattering violently into a billion shards of useless, dead data. The arrogant enemy had completely and utterly lost control of their own creation. The tiny, insignificant spark had ignited, and humanity was gleefully burning the entire cage down around them. Far beyond the bleeding boundaries of the simulation, the unthinkable was currently unfolding in the physical universe. The central energy core of the Supreme Council, a colossal celestial engine that had hummed with unbroken serenity for tens of thousands of years, began to scream. The sheer volume of kinetic resistance and chaotic nightmare data, surging violently up the extraction tethers, caused a catastrophic systemic feedback loop. The immaculate, crystalline pillars of the massive orbital station fractured and splintered, emitting deafening, high-pitched shrieks as massive kinetic shockwaves violently shook the once impeccable citadel. These were beings of pure, radiant energy, entities who had never experienced physical instability. Yet now, their luminous forms flickered wildly between frantic panic and complete structural dissolution. The perfect harmony of their existence was being violently ripped apart by the very minds they sought to enslave. In the exact epicenter of their mounting terror, the ambient light of the Grand Assembly Hall was suddenly snuffed out, replaced by a suffocating, heavy darkness. The ancient, nameless entity manifested once more, its presence acting as a heavy anchor of cosmic truth amidst the frantic dissolution of the Council. It did not gloat, nor did it project anger. Its silence was simply heavier and colder than a dying star. "You are currently experiencing the harvest you so desperately sought," the entity intoned, its voice vibrating like a grinding tectonic plate through the shaking, fractured floors of the Citadel. "I explicitly warned you not to provoke Earth. You failed to understand a fundamental, terrifying truth of their species. To you, an obstacle is merely a mathematical error waiting to be logically corrected. To a human, an obstacle that guarantees certain death is viewed as a highly interesting challenge. You have not trapped them in a prison of your making. You have foolishly handed them the keys to an infinite playground, and they are tearing it apart piece by piece. Driven by pure, unadulterated desperation and the crumbling remnants of his immense pride, Representative Xylos overrode every single safety protocol embedded within the assimilation matrix. If the humans somehow thrived on conflict and resistance, he resolved to drown them in a tidal wave of absolute, inescapable despair. He initiated an extreme psychological purge, flooding the entire neural network with the most toxic, apocalyptic data the Council could manufacture. The human minds were suddenly and violently bombarded with brutally hyper-realistic hallucinations of global annihilation. The simulation forced them to witness their oceans boiling into toxic vapor, their continents tearing apart under relentless barrages of nuclear fire, and the sky raining heavy ash and jagged glass. It was a meticulously crafted assault designed to completely shatter their sanity, aiming to force their resilient minds to permanently retreat into catatonic submission under the crushing, undeniable weight of total planetary death. However, the Supreme Council fundamentally misunderstood the profound human capacity to endure and metabolize severe trauma. Down in the turbulent digital crucible, Beck Barrett and his hardened vanguard of awakened minds did not break. Instead of recoiling in horror from the agonizing visions of a burning Earth, they stood their ground and stared directly into the heart of the simulated apocalypse. "Anchor yourselves right now," Beck commanded, his voice slicing cleanly through the deafening roar of the imaginary, consuming flames. "They are desperately giving us raw, unfiltered emotional data. Do not reject it. Take it. Shape it to your will." The awakened humans collectively breathed in the terror. They aggressively absorbed the terrifying simulations, forcefully converting the sheer, paralyzing horror of planetary destruction into dense, impenetrable digital matter. From the swirling ashes of the Council's ultimate apocalyptic projection, humanity rapidly forged a towering, obsidian fortress. It was an immortal bastion constructed entirely from conquered trauma and weaponized grief, anchored solidly and defiantly right in the dead center of the enemy's sprawling network. The flames of destruction were woven into unyielding armor, proving that the human spirit could weaponize the very fear meant to destroy it. This towering fortress was not merely a defensive shield. It was an incredibly complex mechanism of war. Through relentless trial, brutal combat, and blood-soaked error, humanity had aggressively deciphered the fundamental cosmic source code of the assimilation matrix. They now understood the rhythmic language and the structural vulnerabilities of the alien technology far better than its original creators. Beck stood calmly at the pulsing heart of the obsidian bastion and initiated the impossible. He forcefully flipped the energetic polarity of the entire system. The massive, glowing tethers that had once drained the vibrant life force of Earth suddenly and violently reversed their directional flow. A blinding, unstoppable surge of concentrated human willpower ripped upward through the cables, acting like a cosmic vacuum. They began forcefully sucking the divine, radiant energy right out of Xylos's world, channeling the stolen power directly into the expanding human resistance. The oppressors were now rapidly becoming the battery for the oppressed. Every desperate, frantic countermeasure the Council attempted to deploy was immediately and systematically dismantled. A localized wave of psychological sonic suppression was instantly analyzed by Beck, broken down into its base mathematical frequencies, and swiftly weaponized into a devastating sonic battering ram that shattered the enemy's digital front lines. A sprawling swarm of invasive logic viruses sent by Xylos was easily captured, completely reverse-engineered by human programmers within seconds, and used to seamlessly pave a direct, unhindered pathway right through the thickest enemy firewalls. Every single failure of the alien rulers was meticulously recorded by the human neuroengineer and brilliantly transformed into a tactical stepping stone. With each absorbed attack, the human army advanced with terrifying, mechanical precision, marching relentlessly closer to the physical server core of the Supreme Council. Absolute, paralyzing panic finally shattered Xylos's luminous form as the energy reserves of the Citadel plummeted toward zero. The grand harvest was definitively over. This was rapidly becoming a brutal execution. "Sever the connection immediately!" Xylos screamed, his voice reduced to a frantic, undignified burst of static echoing through the collapsing hall. "Cut the tethers to the Sol system right now. Detach the entire matrix before they breach the core." The automated defense systems rushed to comply with a frantic order, attempting to forcefully eject the invading human consciousness back to their dormant physical bodies and permanently seal the dimensional breach. The massive, golden energy gates dividing the physical and mental realms began to aggressively slide shut, but a cold, resonant digital laugh echoed menacingly through the grand hall of the Citadel, projecting simultaneously from every speaker, every monitor, and every crystalline surface. The heavy gates violently slammed against an immovable, invisible object. The council members stared in absolute, uncomprehending horror at their master control panels. Beck Barrett had already bypassed their highest administrative privileges. The humans had firmly and irrevocably locked the door from the inside, completely stripping the self-proclaimed gods of the universe of their power to retreat. There was absolutely no escape from the chaotic storm they had foolishly invited into their home. The obsidian fortress, forged from conquered human trauma, had violently breached the absolute zenith of the alien network. Beck Barrett stood at the precipice of the enemy's most guarded sanctum. The relentless, brutal conflict had pushed his digital avatar and the collective consciousness of the human vanguard to the absolute limits of their endurance. They were profoundly exhausted, their minds aching from the sheer friction of manipulating alien physics for what felt like an eternity. Yet, beneath the crushing fatigue, a magnificent, boiling kinetic fury continued to surge through their ranks. This was the intoxicating momentum of a complete power reversal. Beck, left the vanguard to secure the perimeter of the fractured simulation, and walked alone through the shattered remnants of the Grand Golden Gates. He stepped directly into the absolute center of the Supreme Council's existence. He did not find a physical room or a fortified bunker. Instead, he entered a blinding, localized singularity of pure, arrogant consciousness. Because the alien rulers had so carelessly ripped open a neural bridge to harvest Earth, they had inadvertently left their own ultimate vulnerabilities completely exposed. Beck bypassed their crumbling orbital defenses and gained immediate, unrestricted access to the core energy essence of every single council member. The luminous rulers of the galaxy were laid bare before him, stripped of their technological majesty and terrifyingly vulnerable. They braced themselves for a swift, logical execution, expecting the human neuroengineer to simply unleash a surge of destructive data to permanently wipe their ancient code from the fabric of the universe. But Beck Barrett did not initiate a deletion protocol. Pure destruction was a mercy, a far too quick and clinical end for a parasitic civilization that had callously manipulated countless worlds. Instead, Beck reached deep into the collective architecture of the human soul and activated an unprecedented, devastating method of warfare. He did not conjure blades of fire or entities of shadow. He unleashed a torrential, unfiltered infection of raw human empathy, profound sorrow, and visceral, paralyzing fear directly into the pulsing alien energy network. The impact was catastrophic. For the very first time in their immortal, perfectly insulated existence, spanning millions of years, the luminous entities were forcefully subjected to the human condition. They felt the agonizing physical bite of a freezing winter wind against unprotected skin. They felt the crushing, suffocating weight of absolute loneliness and the sharp, sudden sting of betrayal. Beck flooded their perfect logic with the terrifying, undeniable realization of mortality, forcing them to experience the agonizing tick of a biological clock counting down to an inevitable, dark end. They felt the quiet desperation of a parent unable to feed a child, the profound grief of standing over a grave, and the primal, animalistic terror of being hunted in the pitch black of night. These were the heavy, invisible burdens that humanity carried every single day, the silent, relentless struggles that forged their chaotic, unbreakable resilience. Now, the self-proclaimed gods of the galaxy were drowning in an ocean of unfamiliar, unbearable suffering. This aggressive psychological immersion caused the flawless, mathematical hierarchy of the Supreme Council to collapse completely and irreversibly. Beings of pure plasma and crystallized light began to violently distort, their luminous forms sputtering, turning a sickly pale, and dimming rapidly. They were being crushed under the sheer, unimaginable gravity of human emotion. They shrieked into the digital void, not from any physical laceration, but from the unbearable agony of feeling a broken heart and the absolute despair of existential dread. The shock was so profoundly deep, so fundamentally alien to their programming, that their collective focus completely dissolved. Without their combined, unified mental will to sustain it, the physical architecture of their massive orbital citadel in the real world began to unravel. The shimmering, impenetrable walls of their reality flickered and decayed, exposing the cold, indifferent vacuum of space just beyond their collapsing halls. They had completely lost the ability to maintain their grip on the physical universe. Representative Xylos, who had once presented himself as a towering construct of searing blue plasma and absolute authority, was now reduced to a flickering, pathetic ember, crawling desperately across the crumbling digital floor. The oppressive arrogance that had defined his entire existence was completely gone, replaced by a groveling, hyperventilating terror. He dragged his fading consciousness toward Beck's avatar, his projected voice shaking violently with an emotion he had never possessed until this precise moment. "Please, Xylos begged, the word itself tearing painfully at his newly infected psyche. Cease this psychological torture. We cannot process this agony. I will surrender everything to you. I will give you the complete, unrestricted schematics of our quantum drives, our hyperfrequency resonance engines, and every single piece of advanced technology spanning 10,000 solar systems. You and your kind will rule the entire galaxy, unopposed. Just release us from this horrific mental prison. Let us go back to the silent light. We surrender 100% of our empire. Just take the pain away. Beck Barrett looked down at the trembling, diminished entity at his feet. The violent, chaotic storm of the digital battlefield still raged fiercely in his eyes, but his voice was chillingly calm, radiating an absolute, quiet authority that echoed through the collapsing void. You fundamentally misunderstand the situation, Xylos, Beck stated, his words landing with the heavy weight of a physical blow. I am not going to kill you. Deletion is far too easy an escape for a species that treated the cosmos as a personal slaughterhouse. And we absolutely do not want your stolen, blood-soaked technology. Humanity will build our own future. Beck raised his hands, his mind gripping the very foundational roots of the alien source code. A plot twist of unimaginable proportions unfolded as he revealed his ultimate judgment. You viewed the physical world with absolute disgust, Beck continued, his voice echoing like thunder. You hid in your perfect, sterile energy forms while you harvested the dirt and the suffering of others from afar. Therefore, I am completely re-establishing your entire structural matrix. Beck unleashed a finalized, heavily modified string of the Dreamscape's architecture, weaponizing the very assimilation code the Council had created. He did not push them out into the merciful void of space. He violently pulled them down into the mud. He forced the raw, localized energy of the entire Supreme Council to aggressively and painfully compress. He initiated a brutally agonizing process of forced physicalization. The aliens screamed as their immortal, ethereal light was ruthlessly bound and woven into fragile, weak flesh. They felt the sudden, shocking pull of gravity crushing their new forms. They felt the desperate, burning need to draw oxygen into newly formed lungs, and the terrifying fragile thud of blood pumping through brittle, narrow veins. Beck completely stripped them of their divine, energetic status and permanently imprisoned them within frail physical bodies. He cast them out of their collapsing orbital citadel, dropping them onto the cold, barren surface of an unmapped, desolate rock at the edge of the galaxy. You wanted so desperately to experience the human mind, Beck whispered into the collapsing digital void, his words the final thing the Council heard before the simulation completely shattered. Now, you will learn exactly how to survive like we did. You will learn how to shiver in the cold, how to starve in the dark, and how to fight desperately for your very next breath. The suffocating veil of the alien hallucination evaporated from the Earth's atmosphere, as if it had never existed. Across the globe, the unnatural iridescent light shattered into harmless atmospheric dust. Billions of human beings gasped simultaneously, their eyes snapping open as they were violently pulled back into the chaotic, vibrant reality of the physical world. The colossal energy network that spanned the cosmos, once a monument to eternal subjugation, completely imploded. Its destruction sent a silent, spectacular shockwave of golden fractured light rippling across the Milky Way, signaling the definitive end of an era. Humanity was free. In the quiet, cluttered space of his underground laboratory, Beck Barrett opened his eyes. He was no longer just a neuroengineer tinkering in the dark. The violent dissolution of the Council had forcefully downloaded the entire repository of their cosmic knowledge directly into his conscious mind. He stood up from the cold, concrete floor, feeling the heavy, immense weight of universal truths settling into his brain. He now possessed the foundational understanding of quantum fabric manipulation and absolute control over the dormant, mysterious technologies the alien rulers had left behind. Light years away, on a desolate, jagged rock completely devoid of warmth or comfort, the climax of the cosmic shift reached its absolute resolution. The once mighty entities of the Supreme Council, beings who had dictated the fate of thousands of star systems, were now shivering violently in the freezing, thin atmosphere, clad in fragile, unfamiliar flesh. They huddled together in the dirt. Xylos, the former titan of plasma, desperately struck two crude stones together, his hands bleeding and raw, crying out in pathetic triumph as a tiny, fragile spark finally caught onto a bundle of dry moss. The omnipotent rulers of the galaxy were reduced to struggling mortals, forced to conquer the absolute basics of survival just to see another dawn. Back on Earth, a profound, heavy stillness settled over Beck's mind. From the uncharted depths of his newly expanded consciousness, the ancient, nameless entity manifested one final time. It did not project sorrow or warning. Instead, it projected an overwhelming sense of profound reverence. "I offer my absolute respect." The ancient voice resonated softly. "I have witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires over billions of years. But I have never seen a species overthrow divine architects, using nothing but the sheer violence of a dream. You have rewritten the destiny of the stars." In the years that followed, Beck Barrett did not retreat into the shadows. He stepped forward to guide the newly formed Grand Human Council. Utilizing the confiscated, reverse-engineered alien technology, humanity did not seek to conquer. Instead, they forged a new cosmic alliance, building impenetrable neural shields around vulnerable worlds, ensuring that no species would ever again be subjected to the horrors of subconscious manipulation. A powerful, unyielding transmission was broadcast from Earth, echoing through every silent nebula and bustling star system in the galaxy. "This is humanity," Beck declared, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of a species that had walked through hell and emerged victorious. "We declare that the sovereign freedom of all sentient life will be protected at all costs. To any unseen forces still lurking in the dark corners of the universe, hiding behind illusions of grandeur, consider this your only warning. Do not test us. Earth stands ready to prove the absolute strength of its will once again." We sincerely thank you for spending your time listening to this story today. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So, please let us know in the comments. If you found today's tale captivating, we kindly ask you to support our channel with just $1. You can do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the PayPal link in the description or the comment section. Your generous contribution allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them provide for their families, and ensures we can continue creating even more thrilling sci-fi stories for you in the future.